Thanks for having us. Like Taylor said, I'm Melanie McCracken. I'm from the South Texas Alliance for Orphans. She did a great job describing. Okay, here we go. Can y'all hear me okay if I'm like this far away? Okay. She did a great job of describing what we do. We are a nonprofit that really just exists to assist and serve and equip churches in fulfilling the biblical call to care for, support families, children, and along the entire continuum of people impacted by the foster system. And so that looks a lot of different ways. And one of the things we get to do is we get to go in and offer a training that helps children's ministry volunteers and staff know what trauma is, what that looks like, and sort of shift a lens that we have of thinking about behavior. And so that's really the goal today. This actual training is like 19 hours long, and so we're just gonna brush the surface today in the hour that we have. I'm gonna have my phone right here, so I will be a good steward of your time. But I'll probably talk really fast. And I'm a notes person. My husband lovingly tells me I have a hard time getting from point A to point B, and so I have notes for you, for me, really for you, to help me get there. So thank y'all so much. Thank you for what you do. I'm a pastor's wife. I'm a mom of 5. And if you go to the next slide, my people are, I don't think he's back there to click. You're kidding. Thanks, Jocelyn. We're gonna click real quick. It's okay. This is my first time to do it where I have to like signal the click, so bear with me with that. So I just have to show you a picture of my people because they're really cute. Aww. There they are. So these are my 5 crazies. I have an 8-year-old. My girls are both 5, but they're not twins. They are 5 months apart, not biologically related. And then I have a 4-year-old son, and then our 5 years and 3 post-adoption surprise in our 3-year-old little boy that just turned 3 this month. So this is my crew. It is crazy town. I come to you with all of this information about trauma-informed care and techniques and tools that we can use as a fellow learner. I absolutely do not have this all figured out. And so I wanted to make sure you knew that as well. So we're going to start with an activity real quick, and you just need a pen, and you can jot these things down on the handout that you were given anywhere. The back on where the first slide is fine, anywhere. But one thing that we all need in our lives are essential connections. We all have essential connections that help us develop healthy relationships. And so I want you to start by thinking about a significant person in your life. One significant person in your life that you have an essential connection to, and just jot that person down. Okay, and then I want you to think about a connection that you have to a group. So a group that you belong to. This could be a recreational group, it could be a social group, your church community, a significant group of people in your life that you are connected to. And write that down. Okay, the next one is a meaningful role. Some role that you play that you feel like gives you meaning. A role that you are closely connected to. Mom, dad, husband, wife, brother, sister, daughter, son, teacher, any role. And then I want you to think of something that you're connected to that just makes you happy. It gives you happiness. It could be a hobby, this could also be a person, someone or something that you're connected to that brings you joy or happiness. And then we're going to think of a connection that we have to our history. Something in our past, or something that helps preserve our past. So I think of photos, photo albums. It could be old home videos. It could be revisiting places that you've lived before. Some kind of connection. It might be another relationship that with a person in your family that helps you preserve that history of your past. And then I want you to think of a connection that you have with a place, a special place that you're connected to. Okay, so I actually have some bad news for you because we actually can't keep all of our essential connections. So life, gets in, things happen, tragedy strikes, different things that occur in our life. We just can't keep all of our connections. So I want you to choose one of your connections that you could just do with that and go ahead and cross that off your list. And unfortunately, I have more bad news for you. We can't keep all of our connections, so I want you to choose another one, another connection that you lose. This is a loss for you, and cross it off. And I'll just we'll cut right to the chase here. The really bad news is that you can only keep one of your connections. You can only keep one connection. So I want you to mark off all other connections except for one connection that if you lost all of the other ones, this is the connection that you would hold on to, that you would keep. Can I have a few people, you can kind of just yell out from where you are. Tell me what connection it is that you chose to keep. Family?
Being a mom.
A mom, being a mom. So your role as a mom, which would mean you would have your children, right? Okay, what else? Okay, being a dad. So the role as a dad, which would mean you would keep that connection with your kids. Anybody else? What connection did you keep?
Place, and that would be Journey Fellowship.
Okay, so your faith community.
Significant person.
Your significant person.
Type of Christ, my happiness.
Awesome. Anybody else? I want to point out that for the majority of us, and we had someone say, I kept my significant person, or we kept people, right? We kept our role as a mom, which would include our children. And I want you to think about children that are in the foster system or children who have been adopted. And the first connections that they lose are their people. Okay? That is the first connection that they lose. It's usually the last one that we want to let go of. It's the first one that they lose. Whether that's their parents, whether that's they've been removed from their parents already, then they lose their biological siblings because people won't take a sibling group. And they lose all of those. It's connections to grandparents. And actually, they lose all of these. But the first one that they lose is that significant person. And so I want us to move forward in this with that in mind as we go forward. Justin, if you'll go to the next slide for me. And then click. This one has kind of some clicks. Okay. So we all know a child who is, for lack of a better word, maybe exhausting, a little bit difficult. And if you're being honest, you might have gotten like a picture in your head just now that like flash of that kid. We lovingly refer to these children sometimes as the sandpaper kids, and sometimes we can't even pinpoint what it is. There's just something about them that is difficult. They rub us the wrong way. I say this lovingly because I have one of these in my home, and he calls me Mom. And you're going to hear a little bit more about him. My poor Seth, he's going to grow up going, Mom, you used me in all of your examples. And that's not fair. But this first circle represents a child who's come from a difficult place in his early years. This is often our sandpaper kid. If you'll click one more time. His brain and his nervous system are underdeveloped, and they're in confusion. So if you picture his brain, there's confusion, there's lack of development there. Okay? There are two causes for this. There are bad things that happen to this child. So bad things that happen, and then there are good things that did not happen to this child. Okay? And this affects the child in a lot of different ways, and we're going to go into those in a little bit. The primary resulting emotions of these bad things that happened to them and the good things that didn't are anger, frustration, and fear. Okay? The next circle, so I'll click again, represents resources necessary to help the child heal, grow, and mature. Okay? The only problem is there's a big gap in between the child and the resources, right? And so that's where this middle circle comes in. The middle circle is what connects the resources to the child. The middle circle is a person, a safe, nurturing adult, perhaps a parent, a caregiver, a counselor, a social worker. Maybe it's a volunteer in the church children's ministry or a staff member. And this person needs to be someone who's intentionally present in the child's life, who is safe, and who is consistent in meeting the child's greatest needs, which are attachment and orientation. We're going to talk about that too. I want you to know that each of you in this room is part of that middle circle. Each of you plays a vital role in the healing, development, and maturity of these kids who come in to your class on a Sunday whose brains are in confusion because of a trauma history. There's so much we could dive into, and so today, just for the sake of time, we're going to look at 4 things that you need to know about children that are within your church ministry. And like I said, this is it's really just brazing the surface. And it's funny, when I heard y'all mention the aquapods, I was like, I don't even think I need to be here. Like, they already are doing this stuff, sensory stuff, like aquapods. That's so awesome. But like I said, I really hope that the Lord would use this time to really shift our paradigm, like give us a new way of thinking about behavior. And so if we go to the next slide, the first thing that I want us to walk away with today is that there's always meaning behind behavior. I'm going to have you say that out loud. There's always meaning behind behavior. We get so focused on the behavior of a child, the one that is crawling under the table and throwing markers, right? That we fail to really dig deep and look at what is the meaning behind the behavior. And so that is the goal of today. And I also want to preface everything that we're going to talk about today with the reality that we know that there is power in the gospel, right? And God uses us as tools because He's gracious like that. He uses us as tools to be used in these kids' lives, but we know that the ultimate power is in Him and in the gospel to change kids and change us, right? We need the gospel every day. And so we're going forward with that in mind as well. So I have a question for you. What comes to your mind when you hear the word trauma? And again, you can just shout out. What pops into your mind when you hear, sorry, Jocelyn, will be the next slide. When you hear the word trauma, just the first thing that pops into your mind?
Pain.
Pain. Sadness. Abuse. Death.
Anger.
Yeah. Anger. Yeah. So this is a big word, right? And it has a lot of different implications. The actual definition of trauma that we're going to use is the result of extraordinarily stressful events that shatter your sense of security. So a person that experiences trauma of any kind, we would say they are left in a place of not feeling secure or not feeling safe. It leaves someone feeling helpless and vulnerable in a way. You will be surprised to know that there are risk factors for when we talk about kids from hard places or kids with a history of trauma. And these risk factors, you could probably find one of these in the majority of children. And we might even look at this list and go, hey, that's me. Like, I have that history of trauma. And so, Justin, if you'll go to the next slide, these are some risk factors of toxic stress that begin in utero. That is the story of my 3 that I adopted from foster care, my kiddos. And they were all exposed to heroin in utero. They were all born addicted to heroin. And they all had to be weaned with really strong drugs like methadone and morphine to just be able to withdraw from the drug and to live after they were born. And so they fall into a lot of these categories, but you will also know that there's kids maybe it wasn't drug exposure, and maybe they're actually not in the foster system or adopted, but they fall in these. So a difficult pregnancy, that can be a stressful pregnancy. The mom's on bed rest. Or in one of our situations, my son is the biological brother of our daughter that we adopted, and she was only 3 months old in our care when mom was pregnant with him. Her entire pregnancy with him, she was trying to go through the process and work services to get her daughter back who she had lost already. So all of the stress of just that difficult pregnancy for her when he was developing inside of her. A difficult birth, so this could be a cord is wrapped around a neck. There's something going wrong, so mom's rushed to an emergency C-section is a difficult birth. Early hospitalization and also separation is included in that. And so you have babies that are rushed off to the NICU. And so whether it's for a day or whether it's for 100 days, there is an immediate separation from their mom, their parents, whoever is with them. And so there's that immediate separation from a caregiver and early hospitalization. So lots of babies end up in the NICU for various reasons. And then we have abuse and neglect, trauma, which we'll talk about. There's 3 types. We'll talk about that in a second. But then also system effects. That's going to be like babies that were maybe in utero or born, or kids that have experienced things like Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane Harvey, big kind of things that affect an entire system of people. So it affects the schools and the hospitals and the family. And so those are what is referred to as system effects. And so all of these things are risk factors for kids that we say are from hard places or have a trauma history. The 3 types of trauma, we have acute trauma, which is maybe something that's experienced one time, so a death in the family, maybe an illness that is acute and then goes away. There's chronic trauma, which is something that occurs over and over and over again. And then we have complex developmental trauma. And this is going to be where we're kind of coming from today, because the majority of children that are in the foster system and come from a history of foster and adoption have complex developmental trauma. And so we say these kids come from what we call cuts. You can go to the next slide. And so we use this acronym. Sorry, you can just click it through till they're all up there. We use the acronym CUTS to kind of help us remember. These kids are coming from a history of chronic trauma. So it's forms of physical abuse, forms of sexual abuse, any domestic violence. They could just be witnesses to domestic violence, not necessarily the actual recipient of the violence. Wars, other forms of political violence, which we can see in children that are coming into our country. Refugee kids have experienced this. And so kids from CUTS have experienced chronic trauma. It starts usually early, and it doesn't just stop after, it's not just one event in their life. It's over and over and over again. For a lot of kids in the foster system, it's separation over and over and over again because they're moved multiple times to different placements for multiple, various reasons. Their environment is unpredictable, okay? So I don't know when I'm going to eat my next meal. I don't know who is going to pick me up. I don't know if my mom or dad are coming back to get me. their environment is very unpredictable. Not only is their environment unpredictable, and this one hit close to home for me, but their responses of the people in their lives are unpredictable. And so as a mom, I'm like, am I responding to my kids in a predictable way? And we'll talk about that as a tool, but they don't know. 1 minute it's going to be a loving response, the next minute it's going to be a violent response. And so their environment, whether it's the responses of people in their life or their physical needs being met, is unpredictable. And then the environment, we would consider it to be toxic and very stressful. And so those are just some things that kind of describe where we're coming from with the kids we're talking about today. Exposing a child to chronic, unpredictable stress literally causes their bodies to churn out inflammatory stress hormones. And so we would say that all of these things are affected by cuts. The body is affected. This is a super interesting fact, but our insulin site receptors in our bodies work to help us have the proper amount of insulin in our bodies that help us with our functioning, our energy, all of those things. But in children that were drug exposed as in utero, their insulin site receptors literally don't work properly. And so any change in their blood sugar, if it's a drop, if it's a little bit too high, can send them into a complete meltdown. Just because of that insulin site receptor not working. And this is not something that doctors can test for and go, okay, well this isn't working and that's causing this behavior. And so we kind of have to take this assumed approach that goes, this could be part of the problem. Their brains are affected, and this is where there's so much amazing research about brain development in utero for babies that are exposed to toxic stress, and not just in utero, but post-birth, as they're going through life with chronic trauma. Their brain is affected. Their brain's growth, the way that their neurons are connecting and firing and forming proper connections, all of that is affected. And so the brain is affected because the stress hormones cause an overactivation. So stress hormones are released. It causes an overactivation of the limbic system, which controls emotion. Okay, do you know any kids that their emotional side is on overdrive, right? All we see is the outward emotion, and it's that limbic system in their brain. It's literally on overdrive. And an underactivation of their prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision making, for cognitive thinking, for executive functioning. And so we see these stress hormones are being released. We don't see that part. And then what we see is the behavior of that excessive emotion and lack of the ability to think and process or make a rational decision, okay? And so a lot of times we use the analogy that children in this state will say have flipped their lid. And if you kind of hold your fist like this, if this were the brain, we have an upstairs brain and a downstairs brain. And part of our brain is called an amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for your big emotions, okay? And most of the time, our prefrontal cortex we have, and it's protecting us from acting out of our big emotions, right? And so we get angry, we get upset, we have excessive emotion, but we have access to our prefrontal cortex that's going, okay, well, you just got cut off in traffic, but you can't just speed up and ram the car in front of you, right? And so our prefrontal cortex is activated, okay? But sometimes it's not, and we would say we even flip our lid, and kids from hard places do this all the time, okay? It could be because somebody took the toy they were playing with. It could be because, we'll talk about sensory stuff, their shirt feels funny. It could be because you said good morning, okay? My little Seth. Good morning, buddy. I mean, flip the lid. Don't call me buddy, he's just lost it. And I literally said good morning, okay? So sometimes we don't know the trigger, okay? We see this example in adults too, of flipping the lid. You think of a pro baseball game where somebody gets hit with a pitch and charges the mound, right? That's an example of flipping the lid, okay? They're not using that prefrontal cortex to make a really rational decision in that moment. And so with kids from hard places, that lid is flipped a lot of the time. And we have to get to a place where we recognize that they do not have access in those moments to their cognitive functioning, to that decision making. And so once they flip the lid, if I'm down there trying to go, okay, well, do you want to trade this for this toy? I mean, the reaction is not going to be what we were hoping for. And so children that have flipped the lid are on high alert, okay? And they're in stress mode, and they're more readily going to flip their lid when there are stressors coming in from their outside environment. And the upstairs brain stops communicating with the downstairs brain, and so they lose their ability to calm themselves and also lose their ability to self-regulate. And then cuts also impacts biology. Literally, chromosomes are changed because of trauma. And that's one of the huge parts I want us to see too, that we serve a God of healing. But literal chromosomes in the body are changed because of trauma. And then a belief system, so it's going to change the way a child sees the world around them, what they believe, who they believe, and then their behavior. All of this comes together to affect their behavior that we see. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're walking through a park. It's a beautiful day. It's not really windy like it has been, and maybe it's in the we'll go with like 60 degrees. Okay, so comfortable, it's sunny, it's beautiful outside. You're walking along in this park, taking it all in. You're noticing the beautiful trees around you, the crisp air, and all of a sudden you look down and you see a huge snake. How would you react? Run. How else? Scream. Okay, good, yeah. So we would either run, we would scream, we would do, I don't know, maybe you're the aggressive type and you're a fighter, so you would like grab something and just start beating the snake. I don't know, maybe you're not afraid of snakes, but for the most part, I think we would be a little bit on alert, right? So now imagine you're walking through that park a few days later. Do you think you're going to walk through that park a few days later in the same mindset that you started your walk the first time? No, right? You're going to be on alert, okay? You're going to be wondering if there's going to be another snake, where it is. You're going to be looking around. You're not really noticing the beautiful trees or the crisp air anymore. If you see a stick on the path out of the corner of your eye, you might be startled because you think it's a snake, okay? Now, every time you go on a walk, you may feel that way because the snake changed your perception of the park, and it may have changed your perception of your safety in this park. Our brains, when reacting to danger, have the ability to help us examine kind of what's going on. When danger is perceived, our brains, in the way that God created them so amazingly, triggers chemicals that are stress hormones that send a message to our brain telling us to usually do one of three things, and we heard a few of these already. Fight, flight, which is run, right? Or freeze, okay? And so when we are in high alert, when we are fearful, we typically go to one of those three responses, okay? We're gonna fight, we're gonna pick something up, and we're gonna start beating that snake until we know it's not gonna hurt us anymore. We're gonna run, so we're gonna flight. We're gonna run as fast and far away as we can. Or we're gonna freeze, which means we have no ability to do anything. We're literally just frozen in our tracks, okay? But when the brain is able to realize that it's not in danger anymore, it stops pumping those hormones and the body is able to relax and everything returns to normal, okay? So when we see the stick the day that we're on the next walk and we see the stick out of the corner of our eye, we might immediately go fight, flight, or freeze mode, but then our brains are able to go, it's only a stick, okay? Inhibitory hormones release in our brains. We're able to calm, regulate, and go, okay, we're fine. We're safe. Children from cuts remain on high alert. They're on high alert, walking through that park, thinking they might see a snake every time. The stress hormones in their brains are often in fight, flight, or freeze. And kids on high alert all the time miss out on the good things. They are not walking into the class at church on a Sunday trying to make your lives difficult or avoid hearing the gospel or the story, but they might not know if they're going to be picked up that day. And even if they've been in a safe home, they could have been in a safe home for years. And that mama is coming back every time. But they are still in that high alert. Okay? Those stress hormones are still being released. And we see this a lot in kids. We see fight. You ever see this in kids? Fight mode. Okay? I'm going to be aggressive. I'm going to hit, kick, scratch. Okay? Freeze mode. They're going to shut down. They're not going to talk to you. They probably won't engage in activities in the classroom. And it looks like this. It just looks like defiance on the outside. Or the fun ones, the flight mode kids, the runners, right? We've all had one of those. So for them, the threat continues in their brain all the time, and they remain on high alert. And they're not able to sit in there and focus on what is being taught. And so that's why we have to know tools that can help get that prefrontal cortex to be able to be accessed where they feel safe. Okay? So they're missing out on what we're teaching about Jesus when they're on high alert, because maybe they're still wondering if they're going to eat their next meal, whether their mom or dad are going to pick them up at the end of the time. And like I said, this is even in kids who have been in safe homes for years and years and years. It takes a lot of time. Okay? Some of the behaviors that we see on the surface. Okay? Anybody recognize any of these behaviors? Tantrums. Okay? All kids throw tantrums. I think all adults at some point throw tantrums too. I know I've thrown my fair share in my home. Stealing. Okay? A lot of times this is because kids from hard places weren't sure if they were going to have anything. So then their coping response, their survival mode is to steal. So they do have. Aggression, acting out, defiance, we see lying, just general disrespect. And so these are things we see on the outside. And so we want to be able to look, if our mantra is that there is meaning behind the behavior, what are the roots of this? What is happening underneath the surface that we don't see? So the first one we're going to talk through is, we've already talked about it, the fear-based response. Okay? And so when a child is living in fear, I think if you click it'll come up. There we go. When a child is living in fear, their conscience is suppressed. Their prefrontal cortex, like we talked about, they flip the lid. Their prefrontal cortex is shut off. And this literally, their amygdala is basically bullying them into bad behavior. So they've set up protective strategies. How can I protect myself? Okay? So maybe this is stealing food or stealing, hoarding toys, whatever, that might look a million different ways, for fear of not having any. Maybe it's a protective strategy of becoming aggressive physically, because that's how they've learned to survive. So this looks a lot different, but they set up protective strategies. It alters brain chemistry. It suppresses the child's voice. They don't have a voice. And it causes them to be unable to discern the needs of others, right? How many times do we look at a child's behavior and go, you need to think about this child, okay? How do you think this made them feel? In these moments of high alert, they don't have the ability to go, oh, it probably made them feel sad, okay? So we have to remember that. And then the fight, flight, or freeze. So that's the fear-based response. Dr. Karen Purvis is a big guru, for lack of a better word, in trauma-informed care. And she had the TCU Institute of Child Development and did a lot of work on behalf of kids from hard places. And a quote from her, she says that children from trauma don't even know they are afraid anymore. It just becomes a part of their existence. Okay, so they're not able to voice, I'm afraid. I don't know if somebody's going to pick me up today. I don't know if I'm going to get my next meal. They're not able to voice that fear. It just becomes a part of them, who they are. And so we want to be aware that one of the underlying roots of those behaviors that we see on the surface is out of fear. Another one is a physical need. Behavior is the expression of a need unmet. Okay? So maybe they're hungry. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they are thirsty. There can be a lot of physical needs that go unmet. And like I said, even if these are getting met, in the moment that they become hungry, become tired, become thirsty, their response is that flipped lid instead of just being able to go, I'm hungry, because they cannot access that voice to express it. And then another root of these behaviors is sensory processing disorder. So when we're born, we all receive sensory input. So sights, sounds, smells, tastes, all of those things. And for someone with sensory processing disorder, these just kind of are underdeveloped, and the sensory, stimuli around them aren't being inputted properly, or there's like a lack of sensory input. And so we see kids with sensory processing disorder a lot. 85% of children in the foster system have sensory processing disorder. Whether it's diagnosed or not, 85% is the number. It develops when an infant is not introduced to the senses. The brain does not learn how to process incoming senses. And so a child gets really overwhelmed by their environment. And what that looks like is bad behavior. I used to teach first grade in a public school, and I would have kids that would start acting out, excessively acting out in the classroom. And I wish I would have known then what I know now, but I just saw it as bad behavior. And in reality, it would be like a day that we had an assembly coming up. And so they're already in fear because they're going to be in a gym with a ton of kids where it's super loud, overstimulated, and it comes across, they're acting out of that fear of that because their senses get on overload. They already know it's coming. And so the bad behavior manifests like that. My son, all three of my kiddos from trauma have this in a certain way or another. Some kids are sensory seekers, so they're going to be your kids that like to spin and spin. They like to jump off things. They're real touchy. They need to seek those senses. They put everything in their mouths. And then there's sensory avoiders, kids who cannot stand certain feels of touch. Maybe a soft touch on their arm feels like sandpaper to them. Have you ever had a kid that was really bothered by tags in their shirt, the line on the toe of their sock? Okay, these are sensory things, and to them it just feels like we can't understand it. We're like, come on, it's just a tag, you know. But to them it could feel like that's sandpaper, or just like they're being stabbed in the back. Like it's just overstimulation, and so they act out of that. My son, one day about a month ago, we were in the car line at school. Bless the car line. Just pray for moms and dads who are in the car line. It's rough. Anyway, so we're in the car line, and my daughter was tapping her foot really softly on the side next to her car seat. And he flipped his lid. He lost his mind. And he never said it's the sound, it's, you know. He just started screaming at the top of his lungs and crying that it was too loud. Okay? This was a very soft, just little tap of her foot. But sensory overload for him. And to him, it must have been the only thing he could hear. And so we had the flip lid in the car, the screaming, the tantrum, all of that, just because of a little tapping sound. And so think about kids that are walking into your classroom. Maybe it's bright lights. Maybe it's the amount of children that are in the room. So all of those things can trigger kids with sensory processing. And then also, looking at meaning behind behavior. Another meaning is that kids from hard places have difficulties with their executive functioning. So we already talked about that. That frontal cortex is shut off. We can't think logically in those moments. And so that's one of the other reasons behind the behavior. And then lack of relationship is another root behind. So lack of relationship, lack of attachment. Has anyone, raise your hand if you've ever been in an orphanage? Maybe,
You mean visited?
yeah, like visited an orphanage, done mission work in an orphanage. What was it like when you walked in? There's no right or wrong, just your experience.
It was emotional.
Emotional? I get varying responses. Some people have said it was chaotic. Other people, which I get the majority of the time, say it was eerily silent. And if you've ever walked into an orphanage and it was eerily quiet, it's because there's lack of relationship. And kids have learned over a long period of time that if they cry, nobody comes, and so they stop crying. And it's like this really eerie thing. Dr. Vera Fahlberg is a pediatrician. She came up with the arousal relaxation cycle of attachment. And what this means is that when a baby's born, right, we know that they cry when they have a need, okay? And during that moment of need, they are in a state of arousal. So cortisol is released in their brain. It's an excitatory hormone. They're going to cry to express that need, okay? But then in the cycle, there's a response, right? They're crying to express a need. So maybe they're wet, maybe they're hungry, they're cold, they're tired, all of those things that babies experience, okay? And a caregiver comes in and meets the need. And when the need is met, serotonin releases in the brain, and that's a calming hormone. And so the baby is calmed because their need is met. And this is a cycle that happens with newborns. I feel like it's like 1,000,000 times a day. Maybe with 3 and 4-year-olds too. And so this cycle happens constantly, over and over and over again. I have a need, excitatory hormones, it's met with a response from a loving caregiver, serotonin, calming hormone, I'm good, okay? And that cycle happens. And during that cycle, when the need is met over and over and over again, that forms attachment, and it forms healthy attachment. And what happens is when that need isn't met at all, or if it's met in an inconsistent manner. We have kids that have disorganized attachment styles. Maybe you have a kid that you know of that doesn't make eye contact or avoids touch. This manifests itself in a lot of different ways, but 80% of foster and adoptive kids have a disorganized attachment style, which means that when they cried, somebody didn't come, or maybe they came sometimes and not other times. That unpredictability of cuts, right? I don't know if my need is going to be met. And so that is a huge cause. That lack of attachment is a huge cause of, or we see the outward behavior, but that's a huge root of that. And then another cause is just immaturity. Trauma literally derails development, okay? So you might have a 10-year-old who has come from the foster system or been adopted who functions at the level of a 4-year-old, okay? So you're gonna see really, you're gonna see fits and tantrums that do not look like the behavior of most 10-year-olds, okay? And so immaturity is another, and just lack of that proper development in their brain, okay? So this is a really fast way of saying these are meanings behind behavior, and we want to get to a place where this is our way of thinking. What is the meaning behind the behavior? And so that's kind of the really fast version of the brain and the history and the fear response. And so now we're going to talk about really quickly things that we can do to help. And it sounds like you guys are already doing a lot of that. So the first thing, and this will be the next slide, Jocelyn, is we want to maximize the child's sense of felt safety. So children who have experienced early trauma need to come into an environment where they feel safe. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read this whole story, but I have a story about a little boy named Johnny. And Johnny's story is one that is really difficult. So from the early days of his life, he's experienced chaos, confusion, violence, more violence than most adults have experienced. And he's 7 years old. The first years of his life, there were severe physical and emotional abuse, long periods of neglect, and multiple moves through the foster system. And if I read it to you, I feel like the majority of us would listen to his story and go, there's no way that that's real. But the sad reality is that his story is the majority of kids in foster care story. It's heartbreaking. He experienced watching a sibling die at the hands of one of their caregivers. He witnessed his mother putting his baby brother out on the porch in a box for long extended periods of time, and he was the caregiver of that baby at 7 years old. Okay? When they were removed from their home, he and the baby did not get the same placement because the person that would take the baby would not take a 7-year-old boy who they felt like was coming in with too much trauma, right? Oh, I can't do those behaviors. Okay? So they were split. So then he's lost his primary caregivers, which also, no matter how awful it was at home, there's still an attachment to that caregiver, and they still love their primary caregiver that they're being separated from, even if it was the worst abuse. Okay, they're still connected to them, and they don't even know any different. Okay, so he's removed from mom. He's separated from the sibling that he has been taking care of, all in the same. And then he's moved between multiple foster homes because of behavior issues. Okay, so that's Johnny's story. So I want us to keep in mind Johnny's story as we look at this next example. Okay, so if we're talking about increasing felt safety, if we look at the green column on the left, the green column represents a child who has come from a healthy, nurturing environment. And the red column on the right represents Johnny, who has a history of complex developmental trauma. Okay? The one on the left, so the green column, this child has grown up in a nurturing, responsive environment where he or she is mastering self-regulation. Of course, like any child from this environment, this child will have moments of dysregulation, all kids do. However, this child has a large window of tolerance, okay? So when things happen, when we see that snake, when somebody takes a toy from me, when I don't get the answer I want, when I don't get my way, okay? My window of tolerance for that is much larger. Okay? He's able to regulate himself in response to the disappointments or challenges of the time. Johnny, on the other hand, as we read about, or as I told you about, has grown up in a neglectful, abusive environment. He had no opportunity or ability to learn self-regulation because he was just in survival mode. Johnny is full of dark emotion, anger, fear, frustration, and when confronted with changes in schedule, disappointments, or emotional challenges, for example, he may potentially erupt in dysregulated responses, and those dysregulated responses look like bad behavior. These are generally those fear-based responses that we talked about. Johnny's window of tolerance is much smaller, okay? So the tapping in the car, okay, that window of response, really small, okay? The child that gets the toy taken from them, or hears the word no for something that they really want. Okay, that window of tolerance is much smaller. They come in and for some reason we've had to change our schedule, and there's kids that flip their lid over just not having a predictable schedule, okay? Anything like that, any smaller thing where they're not able to regulate themselves as easily. And so that window of tolerance is much smaller, and so we want to create an environment of felt safety. We can go to the next one, Dustin. So to do this, to create an environment of felt safety is really at the heart of how we help children heal. Okay? Felt safety and connection help children begin to grow new neurons. This is so incredible. They can literally grow new neurons in their brain, and new behaviors will develop because of those new neurons. And so a lot of times this is going to look different. There's really quickly, we'll go through these, but one of them is to support healthy brain chemistry, and so sensory input activities. The aquapod is awesome for supporting healthy brain chemistry. Even things like Play-Doh, okay? It's relaxing fidgets to have if you have in your classroom, and you don't have to spend a lot of money on stuff like this as a children's ministry. It could be the Play-Doh, it could be pipe cleaners, kids that just need something that they are playing with while they're listening. And I think you'd be amazed. I think the hesitation on our part is, oh no, I don't want them distracted by something. And the reality is the majority of the time, this actually helps them pay attention better when they have something to manipulate with their hands. And so we want to give them sensory input, healthy sensory input. One way to do this too is just a few ideas. So magic mustache is literally just taking your finger, if you put it on your upper lip like this and push down, okay? This is a pressure point for us, and it's calming, okay? So in your next business meeting, you can just sit there like this, and they're just gonna think you're in deep thought, okay, but you're really like regulating. And so even just teaching them things like that, like when you start to feel stressed or when you walk in, or we're gonna do magic mustache for a minute, okay? As a whole group, you don't have to single out certain kids. Do this with all of them. Another one is pushing down a wall. Kids think this is so funny. In transitions, this is really good. If you're moving from snack time to lesson, or lesson to craft, or whatever that looks like. Do y'all think we can push this wall down? No, And sometimes I tell people, maybe this will get some kids more hyped up than calm, but you take them over and just have them all push as hard as they can on a wall. And that's giving them healthy sensory input. Pressure into their palms is positive sensory input, healthy brain chemistry supporting. Heavy books, I know that sounds like some form of abuse in itself, but really, like if you have like a stack of Bibles, or there's just a kid that's having a really hard time regulating, carrying heavy things helps. So even if it's in a backpack or just in their hands, if you say, you know what, can you take this to the teacher next door, and you can just write a little note on there and they can take it over, and then she's in, great, thank you so much, can you take these back? And just literally carrying something heavy helps regulate and gives them that healthy brain chemistry. Another idea is pushing or pulling on a chair, and this is just sitting down. You can put your hands under your chair and either try to push up and push your bottom up, or pull up on the chair as hard as you can. And that's just giving that positive sensory input pressure into their, this all sounds so simple and silly, but it really helps with healthy brain chemistry. Also, healthy brain chemistry includes hydration and nutrition. Hydration and healthy snacks every 2 hours. Do y'all do snack time in your classes? No? So this might be something that I know, I'm not like giving you like, here's what you have to do, but it might be an idea. Or if there's kids that you notice that get dysregulated every Sunday in class, especially at a certain time, okay, maybe it's something where you could allow parents to provide a snack. I know we run into allergy stuff there too, so you'll have to navigate that as a church. But and then water, that's an easy yes if they want water. So I don't know if it's having little cups in the classroom, what that looks like. By the time we feel thirsty, we have lost 10% of our cognitive functioning. That's everybody. By the time you feel thirsty, 10% of your cognitive functioning is gone. So yeah, drink your water. No, I know, it's like time for naps on Sunday afternoon, or football, I don't know what you want to do today, but. So really offering like a snack or hydration, that's something I had to let go of in my house, because I was going to be like this super scheduled, like 3 meals a day, a morning snack and an afternoon snack. And then I realized that my kids' insulin receptors drop much faster, and they need a snack really every 2 hours. They need something. And so that had to become an easy yes for me. If you want a snack, you may have an apple, you may have a cheese stick, something healthy. But it had to be an easy yes, instead of being so stuck on no, it's not snack time. And so really just kind of opening our minds to being more flexible there. And then one thing though that can cause some anxiety in kids from hard places too with the food is that when snack is over, if they are one that maybe didn't know if they were ever getting snack or food or meals, that can be a trigger. And so you could even just write their name on their baggie or their cup and go, snack time is over, but we're going to put this right up here and you can take it with you when you go. That way they know this is still mine, and they're not taking it away from me. So just some ideas there. And then physical activity is another way to support healthy brain chemistry. Repetitive movement, walking, jumping, literally decreases stress chemicals in our brains. So get the kids moving, especially in transitions. Get them moving. Okay, our next one, you can click, Jocelyn, is using safe touch. This is really important in class with our kids. Using safe touch reduces our heart rate, reduces our blood pressure, it curbs our stress hormones, and facilitates food absorption. So crazy, but healthy touch. So easy ways to do this, high fives, okay? So have someone at the door upon greeting the kids. Give a high five, a fist bump, an elbow bump, whatever that looks like for y'all. You can come up with your own things. Another thing is to just, when you walk up to a kid or greet a kid, give me your hands. And they just put their hands in your hands, okay? And that's just giving them healthy touch, safe touch. The next one is make it safe to talk. So give them an environment where they feel safe to talk. We said children from trauma have had no voice, and so we want to make it safe for them to have that voice. What this looks like is getting on their level. Get down with them. Get on your knees to talk to them. Another really important one is eye contact. Okay? Make eye contact with every child that comes into your class. It's really important. And this can even look like upon them coming in. You're down on your knees, your hands are up. Give me your hands. And when they give you their hands, they're really forced to make eye contact with you in that moment. Okay? And behavior matching. So this doesn't mean that when they're throwing the tantrum, you're on the floor throwing the tantrum. Even though we probably want you on the inside. I know, right? Like I said, I've done that plenty of times in my home, and it does not work, actually. It actually escalates the situation. And so really getting on their level, okay? So going from standing over a child in a tantrum and saying, get up, we don't throw tantrums, or let's go do that. Standing over them is I usually walk out and do this with someone, but for video's sake, I'll stay up here. But when you're standing up over a child, it's very intimidating. And so get down with them, sit on the floor. There have been times when my son is in a major meltdown, full on the floor tantrum, and I just sit down on the floor. I don't say anything, just sit there and wait. And eventually he's like, hey, wait a minute. She's on the floor with me. And he is able to calm and regulate. Not every time. This is not like I'm telling you, if you do this, this for sure will happen. But this will help create that environment of felt safety. Get on their level. Try to make eye contact. Healthy touch. Give me your hands. Okay? Just some practical things. And then voice quality, voice matching. Make sure we're not using or giving like $1 million response for a $1 behavior. So watch our tones, all of that. And another one is making the day predictable. So we want our routines to be predictable in class. So every Sunday they know when I come in, this is what we do. We start with this, we go to this, and then we do this, okay? You can even make picture cards, which is super helpful. You could have a pen that you move, like, okay, now activity time is over, we're moving to story, or whatever that looks like in y'all's time together. So make the routines really predictable. Kids need structure in their routines. They also need structure in their responses, okay? So that predictability. I know how my teacher in this class is going to respond to me. And then the next one we can click is to prepare the child for transitions. For kids from hard places, transitions can be a really big trigger, okay? So if we're abruptly moving from one activity to the next, that can just trigger them and their lid is flipped, okay? So they're fighting, they're flying, they're like trying to run, or they're freezing. And so really get on top of that. This could even mean you just go 5 more minutes and then we're moving to this. And don't assume every week that they know. Don't ever assume that they know. Always announce transitions, okay? We're gonna have 5 more minutes, and they don't know what 5 minutes is, but at least they've been warned, okay, in their minds, like, a change is coming, okay? If it's an individual that really struggles with this that you've noticed, you can use game timers. You can flip one over right in front of them, okay? When this sand runs out, we're moving on to the next activity. Just little things like that that really help their brains prepare for that change. And then, like I said, do this every class, even if that kid is there every single week. Keep reminding them of those transition times. And then be a detective to recognize hot spots in the kids. As you get to know the kids that are coming into your classes, you will be able to start recognizing triggers for them. So maybe the trigger is loud noise. Maybe it is hunger. Maybe their trigger is a certain transition time or something, okay? So you'll start to recognize these. That's where we can have fidgets available for kids that really help them focus. Kids who are extra bouncy or who have a difficult time focusing or sitting in a lesson, give them that pipe cleaner and they just can manipulate it as they're sitting there listening. And then another really simple thing is Band-Aids. Oh, it sounds so weird, but offer Band-Aids for hurts, and you can get boxes of Band-Aids even at the dollar store, super cheap. And for inside hurts and outside hurts. And you'll be amazed at a child who comes to you with hurt feelings or is upset because something got taken away from them, and you offer them a Band-Aid for their hurt, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, I'm fine, you know. And so it's just a Band-Aid. It's like giving them a sticker, right? But it's a Band-Aid, and you're acknowledging their hurt. Oh, I bet that really hurt your feelings. Can I give you a Band-Aid? And even in the moment of putting the Band-Aid on, you're using safe touch. So that's another sensory input, healthy, positive brain chemistry. There. Okay, really fast, guys, I promise. For children, we'll go to the next one. Connections matter. So we always want to make a connection with the kid. This is as simple as making eye contact, knowing them by name, learning something about them, okay? All of these things. And I know you guys probably have a lot of kids in and out of your classes. And so really taking the time to be intentional about connecting, finding a connection with these kids. There's a direct correlation between my connection to a child and my emotional tolerance of them. There's a direct correlation between my connection to a child and my emotional tolerance of them. So think about that sandpaper kid. What can you do to connect with that child? Maybe you just learned something they like and you talk to them about it. And you guys are probably doing all this stuff already. Maybe it's you really are intentional about giving that healthy touch to them or making that eye contact. Make a connection. A mantra that we use is connect before you correct. So before you correct a behavior, make a connection with the child first. Okay, don't just go straight to correcting. Connect before you correct. And that's actually the next slide. Create a connection before correction. Coming and going from class is huge with this, so hellos and goodbyes. Make that a really good opportunity to make a connection with that child. Bye, Johnny, put your hands in my hands. Look at my eyes. I'll see you next week, okay? Simple as that. Make that connection with that child. And then use the power of yes. Yes releases healthy chemicals in the brain that make us feel, I don't know, if you think of like, I'm trying to think of a way to describe this, but when we hear the word yes, right, we're kind of energized a little bit because not only are we getting something we want, but there's just kind of some power in that word. And so as often as you can, use yes. And when you can't, find another way to say no, okay? So instead of, Johnny, no, we do not jump on that chair, or we don't jump on the chair. Rephrase that. Johnny, we sit on our chairs. Watch and show, okay? So just learn to kind of rephrase to where the word no is not the first response that we give to a child, or if they're asking for something. Can I play with Play-Doh right now? Instead of, no, we're not playing with Play-Doh. That doesn't work for me right now, but maybe we can play with Play-Doh after our story. Okay, so maybe it's just finding a new way to say no. So we're still in control of the class, right? We still are kind of getting the outcome that we need, but we're finding a new way to say it. Give voice to the child, connecting responses, so find that other way to say no that doesn't require the word no. And then praise the child often for who they are and what they do. Praise, praise, praise. That's another way we make a connection. It takes a lot of intentionality and a lot of practice. And then the last one we're going to talk about is playfulness. With children, playfulness wins. And this is where we as adults have to really get to a place where we kind of lay aside our pride, right? There's a slide that has kind of questions for us. We're going to kind of skip through that today, but there are challenges and barriers to our playfulness as adults. My husband is really good with my kids in like using the voices and playing superhero, but for some reason for me, it's an area that I struggle. Like I struggle to get involved in their play with them like that. I don't know if I'm embarrassed, like nobody's home with me. I'm like, it's just me. Nobody's here watching me. But I struggle with that. And so we want to like just bring down those barriers and get playful with them. It's probably going to be embarrassing around, especially maybe strangers that you're working with in the classroom. And so we have to lay down our pride and go, I'm gonna get playful with this kid for the sake of connection with them and that healthy brain chemistry. And so it requires getting out of our comfort zone. So it could be using pretend play, using funny stories, using puppets, using silly stories with older kids. One that I've told before is one time my brother was eating spaghetti and somebody at the table said something funny and he laughed so hard that a noodle came out of his nose, okay? So you can just like make up some funny, silly story. And like I said, these aren't like a foolproof thing. This is always going to work, but it's another way to engage that child. With my son, who I always use as my examples, I love you, Seth, so much. In the moments of his meltdowns, if I will stop taking his meltdown and tantrum personally and go, okay, no, I'm going to get him to comply and modify that behavior, and I see the need, I'm able to let down my pride and go, I'm going to make him laugh. Okay, that's the last thing I want to do in the moments where he's like physically scratching me and punching me. I don't want to make him laugh. I just want to like tell him that this is not okay behavior, right? But I know if I can get him to laugh, he snaps out of it immediately. And I'm not joking. I'm not just saying that. So I've done as much as like fake trip. I will go to great extremes. I know, he thinks my pain is funny. And so if I can get him to laugh, if it's a funny story, if I just start to tickle him a little bit, okay? Y'all, he goes from the lid is flipped, he is not able to regulate, he is hysterically screaming, kicking, punching, literally scratching and drawing blood on me, to laughing. And then he's regulated. And then I can have the conversation, okay? In the moment that he's kicking me, it doesn't do much good to go, we don't kick mommy, because he's not accessing that frontal cortex, right? And so I have to wait. I have to wait until he snaps out of it. He's accessing his frontal cortex. He's calm in the moment. His lid is not flipped anymore to where we can have the teaching moments, okay? So if you can get them to laugh, so be silly, engage them in that play, get them to laugh. And a lot of times it will just really help them to regulate those high emotions. And then lastly, so there's one, we'll skip, Jocelyn, skip through that one. For children, presence matters. And I know Taylor said, like, this is like, we're kind of preaching to the choir saying, but showing up, being consistent, being a presence in their life, even if that means like intentionally remembering their face and their name and talking to them when you see them out in the halls, after church, if you run into them in the community, and just making them feel like that you notice, you remember. So show up, be present, and I want to encourage all of you in the difference that you're making. I know it's easy to get into the mode where we think, what good can I do? I'm only with them an hour and a half a week. Maybe it's only once a month. I know at our church we have our rotation is where they're not always with the kids all the time. And so what difference can I make in such a small amount of time? So I want to read a story to you very quickly, and then I promise I'm finished. It says, what difference can we make in an hour or two a week? Someone asked me, children come to our center 1 hour a week, and this is a question we hear often. There's a ministry in the Ukraine that we have visited. This ministry has set up training centers around Kyiv and other cities in the Ukraine in which young people from difficult, unsafe backgrounds can come and spend a certain time of their day. In these centers, there are fun things to do, opportunities to learn life skills, and most importantly, to learn about Jesus. The environment is safe. Safe people are there for the children and teens to connect with for what little time they are there. One worker at the center questioned the value of the kids coming for such a short time. And when they had to go back into the chaos and unsafe environments, what good am I doing? His question was answered not only by research on the subject, but more importantly, by the testimonies of the kids who came. Because you were here for me, I'm doing much better in school. Because you were here for me, I'm learning life skills that will better prepare me for the future. Because this is a safe place to come, I know when things are bad at home, I can come here. Because you were here for me, I know Jesus. Over time, adults in those centers saw the children change and grow. They saw the children transformed by hope, embracing a whole new view of life that they never knew existed. 1 hour a week can transform the heart and mind of a traumatized and wounded child. And so if you'll go to the next slide, Jocelyn. A little does a lot. So you might leave going, I'm only doing a little, I'm only with them an hour a week. But I want you to see that a little does a lot. Because when they're in the safe, nurturing, loving environment, okay, they're being fed, they're being taught the gospel, okay? And maybe they are. We also can't assume that every child is leaving on a Sunday going home to a safe place, right? Okay, that's a reality. Okay, that families walk into our churches and then go home and it's total chaos. And they're not removed from their home. They're in that. They're living in that. Okay? And so they go home, but they're still taking pieces of what you've taught them into that, even into that unsafe environment. And then they're coming back. Okay? And they're coming back, and they're coming back. And so you are making a big difference in the lives of these kids. So I know this was probably like drinking from a fire hydrant, but I hope at least if we leave here today with a paradigm shift, that there's meaning behind the behavior, and then we have a few practical things that we can start trying to do with these kids, make those connections. That would be amazing. Do y'all mind if I pray for you really quick? Father, we thank you so much for this day. God, I thank you for these that are in this room, God, their hearts just to serve in their church, to serve the kids. Father, it's not a glamorous role. It doesn't get a lot of accolades or thanks. So God, I pray that you would bless them in such a unique and special way. God, I just pray that you would remind us first and foremost that hearts and lives and brains and bodies are changed and transformed by you. So God, we would be messengers of the gospel, that we would be prayer warriors for these kids that we interact with on a regular basis, knowing that you, Jesus, have the power to change hearts and lives. You have the power to heal perfectly. God, that you would continue in your grace to use us as tools to promote safety so that these kids can come and they can learn with the clearest of minds and the most minimal amount of fear as they walk into these classrooms. God, I just pray your richest blessings over this church. God, that the gospel would be made clear, that people would get saved. We love you so much, Jesus. And we thank you so much for these. It's in your name I pray. Amen. Thank y'all so much for having us.